My name is Daniel, and 2 weeks ago, my life imploded. I'm talking nuclear level. Everything you thought was solid, vaporized kind of implosion. I was arrested, and I was arrested for something I did not do. Specifically, I was arrested on suspicion of abusing my girlfriend, Sarah's 8-year-old son, Ethan. I'm sitting here in my empty apartment, staring at the peeling paint on the ceiling, trying to make sense of the last few weeks. It feels like a twisted nightmare, the kind you wake up from in a cold sweat, grateful it wasn't real. Only, this is real. Sarah and I had been together for almost 2 years. It wasn't perfect, no relationship is, but it was good. Really good. We met at a local bookstore. I was browsing the history section, my weakness, and she was wrangling a clearly bored Ethan in the children's section. He was, to put it mildly, throwing a tantrum of epic proportions. Sarah looked completely mortified and exhausted. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the desperate look in her eyes. Maybe it was the sheer chaos of the situation. But I knelt down and started making silly faces at Ethan. I pulled out some basic magic tricks, making a quarter disappear, pulling a fake flower from my sleeve. He was instantly captivated. The tantrum evaporated like morning mist. Sarah looked at me, stunned, then offered me a grateful, genuine smile. That was it. That was how it started. We exchanged numbers, went for coffee a few days later, and things just clicked. I fell for her hard, and, as far as I knew, she fell for me too. Ethan was a challenge. Don't get me wrong, he's a bright kid, full of energy and imagination, but he's also sensitive. He's prone to meltdowns, gets easily frustrated, and sometimes says things that seem exaggerated, to put it mildly. Sarah explained that he had some issues with his biological father, who was largely absent from his life and, when he was around, was reportedly a volatile and unreliable presence. I made a conscious effort to be patient with Ethan, to be a positive male role model in his life. We built Lego castles, read bedtime stories, went to the park, played video games, mostly Mario Kart, which I secretly enjoyed way more than I should have. I tried to be the kind of father figure I wish I'd had growing up, and for the most part, it worked. We had our moments, sure. The occasional spilled juice box, the arguments over screen time, the refusal to eat vegetables. Normal kid stuff. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until it wasn't. The day it happened started like any other Saturday. Sarah had to work a double shift at the hospital. She's a nurse, and they were short-staffed. I volunteered to watch Ethan. We had planned to go to the zoo, something he'd been looking forward to for weeks. We had breakfast, pancakes with chocolate chips, his favorite. We watched cartoons. We even managed to get out the door without a single argument about brushing teeth. The zoo was crowded, as expected. We saw the lions, the giraffes, the monkeys. Ethan was in his element, pointing and chattering and asking a million questions. He wanted to ride the carousel, so we did. Twice. Everything seemed perfect. Then, on the way home, everything changed. We were in the car, stuck in traffic, when Ethan suddenly started crying. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked, my voice gentle. He just kept crying, silently, tears streaming down his face. "Ethan, tell me what's wrong. Did you get hurt? Are you feeling sick?" He shook his head, still sobbing. "Ethan, please," I pleaded. "You're scaring me." Finally, he choked out a single word. "Hurt." My blood ran cold. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned to face him, my voice tight with concern. "Where does it hurt, Ethan?" "Show me." He hesitated, his eyes wide with fear. Then, he pointed to his arm. "Daniel hurt me," he whispered. The world tilted. I swear to God, Reddit, I didn't touch him. Not in anger, not in any way that could possibly cause him harm. I hadn't even raised my voice. I'd been nothing but patient and kind and loving. but he said I hurt him, and that was enough. That single accusation, whispered in a choked voice, was enough to unravel everything. I'll tell you what happened next in the next part. I need to go lie down. My head is killing me. I can't believe this is happening, so where was I? Oh yeah, the moment my life turned into a goddamn horror movie. Ethan said I hurt him. He pointed to his arm, and suddenly, I was a monster. I stared at him, dumbfounded, trying to process what he'd just said. Ethan, I said, my voice shaking, what are you talking about? I didn't hurt you. What happened at the zoo? Did you fall? Did someone bump into you? He just kept repeating, Daniel hurt me. Daniel hurt me. Like a broken record. Panic started to claw its way up my throat. I knew instinctively that this was bad. Really bad. Ethan, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Please tell me what happened. Show me where it hurts. He wouldn't say anything else. He just kept crying and repeating those 3 words. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. I tried to reason with him, to get him to explain, but he was inconsolable. I kept replaying the day in my head, searching for any clue, any incident that could have triggered this. But there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. When we got back to the apartment, I called Sarah. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice tired. Hey, she said. Everything okay? Ethan wasn't giving you too much trouble, was he? Sarah, I said, my voice trembling. Something happened. Ethan says I hurt him. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard her sigh. What? What are you talking about? I explained what happened in the car, how he started crying, how he accused me of hurting him. I don't understand, I said, my voice cracking. I didn't do anything. I swear, Sarah, I would never hurt him. Okay, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. Calm down. I'll be home as soon as I can. The next few hours were agonizing. I tried to comfort Ethan, but he wouldn't let me near him. He just sat on the couch, staring at the TV, his eyes red and swollen. Sarah arrived home looking exhausted and worried. She rushed to Ethan, hugging him tightly. What happened, sweetie? She asked, her voice soft and soothing. Tell Mommy what happened. He looked at me, his eyes filled with fear, and then he pointed at me again. Daniel hurt me, he said. Sarah's expression hardened. She looked at me, her eyes filled with suspicion. Daniel, she said, her voice cold. What's going on? I repeated my story, pleading with her to believe me. Sarah won swear I didn't do anything. He's confused. Maybe he had a bad dream. Maybe someone at the zoo. Did you yell at him? She asked, her voice tight. Did you punish him? Did you touch him in a way that made him uncomfortable? No, I shouted, my voice rising. I didn't do any of those things. I would never. She looked at me, her eyes filled with doubt. Ethan, she said, turning back to her son. Show Mommy where Daniel hurt you. He hesitated, then slowly pulled up the sleeve of his shirt. On his arm, just below his elbow, was a faint bruise. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. I stared at it, my mind reeling. I had no idea how it got there. I hadn't seen it at the zoo. I hadn't noticed anything amiss. Daniel, Sarah said, her voice trembling with anger. What the hell is this? I don't know, I cried, my voice desperate. I swear, Sarah, I don't know how that got there. I didn't do it. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. The trust was gone, replaced by suspicion and fear. She picked up the phone and called the police. I begged her not to. I pleaded with her to listen to me, to give me a chance to explain. But she wouldn't listen. I have to protect my son, she said, her voice cold and unwavering. The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers, a man and a woman. They asked me questions, their faces grim. I repeated my story, my voice shaking. They didn't seem to believe me either. They took me into custody. As they led me out of the apartment, I looked back at Sarah. She was standing in the doorway, holding Ethan tightly, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with a mixture of fear and betrayal. That was the last time I saw her. I spent 2 nights in jail. 2 of the longest, most terrifying nights of my life. I was interrogated, fingerprinted, photographed. I felt like a criminal, even though I knew I was innocent. I kept replaying the day in my head, trying to find some explanation, some way to prove my innocence. But there was nothing, just the bruise on Ethan's arm and his unwavering accusation. Eventually, I was released on bail. My lawyer, a friend of a friend, managed to convince the judge that I wasn't a flight risk. I came back to my apartment, a shell of my former self. The place felt empty and cold, devoid of any joy or comfort. Sarah hasn't called. She hasn't answered my texts. I'm completely cut off from her and Ethan. I don't know what to do. I'm facing serious charges that could ruin my life. I'm being accused of something I didn't do, and I don't know how to prove my innocence. I'm lost, Reddit. I'm scared, and I don't know where to turn. The silence is deafening. My phone hasn't rung since I got out on bail. No texts, no emails, nothing. Just the gnawing anxiety that Sarah believes I'm a monster, that Ethan is scared of me. Let me tell you about the bail conditions. They're pretty standard, I guess, for this kind of thing. No contact with Sarah or Ethan. Can't go within 100 feet of their apartment, their school, or any place Ethan might reasonably be. It's like I've been erased from their lives. My lawyer, her name is Miss Jenkins, is practical. She's seen it all, I guess. She listened to my story, asked a bunch of questions, and then gave me the hard truth. Daniel, she said, this is a tough situation. Child abuse cases are notoriously difficult to defend. The prosecution only needs to convince a jury that there's a reasonable possibility you committed the crime. And Ethan's testimony, combined with the bruise, is going to be very compelling. But I didn't do it, I protested, my voice rising. He's lying, or confused, or I don't know, but I didn't hurt him. She held up a hand, her expression calm. I believe you, Daniel. But believing you and proving your innocence in a court of law are 2 very different things. We need evidence. We need something to cast doubt on Ethan's accusation. And that's the problem. There is no evidence. There are no witnesses. No security camera footage. Just his word against mine. Miss! Jenkins suggested a few things. A polygraph test, which I immediately agreed to, a psychological evaluation, and a thorough investigation into Ethan's background, particularly his relationship with his biological father. The polygraph is scheduled for next week. I'm terrified. I know I'm innocent, but what if the machine malfunctions? What if I get nervous and give the wrong answers? What if it says I'm lying, even though I'm telling the truth? The psychological evaluation is supposed to assess my mental state and determine whether I'm capable of committing the crime I'm accused of. I'm not worried about that. I know I'm not a violent person. I've never even been in a fight. It's the investigation into Ethan's background that gives me a sliver of hope. Miss! Jenkins thinks that his relationship with his father might be a factor. Maybe he's projecting, or maybe he's been coached to say these things. I don't know, but it's the only lead we have. I've been spending my days holed up in my apartment, trying to distract myself. Reading, watching movies, anything to keep my mind off things. But it's not working. The anxiety is always there, a constant dull ache in my chest. I haven't been able to sleep properly. I keep having nightmares about being back in jail, about Sarah looking at me with disgust, about Ethan crying and accusing me. I've lost my appetite. I force myself to eat something, but it all tastes like ash in my mouth. I've called my parents, of course. They were devastated. They believe me, but I can hear the fear in their voices. They're worried about me, about my future. I've told a few close friends what happened. They're supportive, but I can see the doubt in their eyes too. It's like I'm tainted somehow, accused of something so horrible that people can't help but look at me differently. I tried going back to work, but it was a disaster. My boss was understanding, but my coworkers were awkward. They avoided me, whispered behind my back. I could feel their judgment. I ended up taking a leave of absence. I just couldn't handle it anymore. So here I am, alone, scared, facing the biggest crisis of my life. I keep replaying the day it happened, searching for some clue, some explanation, and then it hits me. Something that I hadn't really considered before. Ethan's imagination. He's always had a vivid imagination. He tells elaborate stories, creates imaginary friends, and sometimes blurs the line between reality and fantasy. What if? What if he genuinely believes that I hurt him, even though I didn't? What if he imagined it, or misinterpreted something, and now he's convinced it's real? It's a long shot, I know, but it's the only explanation that makes sense to me. I need to talk to someone who knows Ethan well, someone who can shed some light on his imagination, on his mental state. But who? I can't talk to Sarah. I can't go near her. His teachers? Maybe. But they probably wouldn't talk to me, given the circumstances. And then it hits me. His babysitter. Her name is Emily. She's a college student who lives in the neighborhood. She's been babysitting Ethan for years. She knows him well. She might be my only hope. I find her number online and take a deep breath. I'm about to violate the no contact order in the loosest sense, since it doesn't specifically forbid me from contacting other people about Ethan. But I have to take the risk. I dial the number. Please answer, Emily. Please answer. The phone rang 3 times before Emily answered. Hello? Her voice sounded young, a little hesitant. Hi, Emily, I said, my voice tight with nerves. This is Daniel, Sarah's friend. I used to date Sarah. There was a pause. I could practically feel the suspicion radiating through the phone line. Oh, she said, her voice cool. I know who you are. Emily, I know this is awkward and I'm sorry to bother you, but I really need your help. It's about Ethan. Another pause. What about Ethan? I can't really go into details over the phone, I said, choosing my words carefully. But it's important. It's really important. Would you be willing to meet with me? Just for a few minutes? I promise I won't take up too much of your time. She hesitated. I could hear the internal debate raging in her mind. I don't know, she said finally. Sarah wouldn't like that. Emily, I understand, I said, but this is about Ethan. It's about his well-being. I promise I won't do anything to put him in danger. I just need to ask you a few questions. Finally, she relented. Okay, she said reluctantly, but just for a few minutes. And somewhere public. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop across town, far enough away from Sarah and Ethan to avoid any potential problems. I arrived early, my stomach churning with anxiety. I ordered a coffee and sat at a table near the window, watching the street. Emily arrived about 10 minutes later. She was even younger than I remembered, probably not even 20 yet. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around the coffee shop. I stood up and greeted her, trying to project an air of calm I definitely didn't feel. Thanks for meeting me, Emily, I said. I really appreciate it. She nodded curtly and sat down. What did you want to talk about? She asked, her voice guarded. It's about Ethan, I said, my voice low. As you probably know, I've been accused of hurting him. Her eyes widened slightly. Yeah, she said. Sarah told me. Emily, I swear, I didn't do it, I said, my voice pleading. I would never hurt Ethan. I care about him a lot. She looked at me skeptically. Then what happened? That's what I'm trying to figure out, I said. Emily, you've known Ethan for a long time. You know him better than almost anyone outside of his family. Can you tell me anything about his imagination? Does he ever make things up? Does he ever blur the line between reality and fantasy? Emily thought for a moment, her brow furrowed. Ethan has a really big imagination, she said finally. He loves to tell stories, and he has a lot of imaginary friends. Sometimes he gets really caught up in his own little world. Has he ever said things that weren't true? I asked. Has he ever accused anyone of doing something they didn't do? She hesitated again. Well, she said, there was one time. A few months ago. He told Sarah that his old babysitter, Jessica, had locked him in the closet. Sarah was really upset, and she confronted Jessica about it. But Jessica swore she didn't do it. She said Ethan was just playing and he got scared. My heart leaped. And what happened? I asked, my voice eager. Sarah didn't believe Jessica at first, Emily said. But then Ethan started saying other things that didn't make sense. He said Jessica had turned into a monster and tried to eat him. It became clear he was just making things up. So Sarah realized he was lying? I asked. Yeah, Emily said. She apologized to Jessica, and everything went back to normal. But it was weird for a while. This was it. This was the glimmer of hope I'd been searching for. Emily, this is incredibly important, I said, my voice urgent. Do you think it's possible that Ethan is doing something similar now? That he's imagining things or misinterpreting something, and he genuinely believes that I hurt him? She thought for a long moment, chewing on her lip. It's possible, she said finally. Ethan is a very sensitive kid, and he's been through a lot with his dad. Maybe he's just confused. Emily, would you be willing to talk to Sarah about this? I asked. Tell her what you told me. Tell her about the incident with Jessica? She looked at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know, she said. I don't want to get involved. Sarah is really angry at you, and I don't want to make things worse. Emily, please, I begged. This could save my life. I'm being accused of something I didn't do. If Sarah knew that Ethan has a history of making things up, it might change her mind. It might give her some doubt. She looked at me, her expression troubled. I could see that she was torn. Finally, she sighed. Okay, she said reluctantly. I'll talk to her, but I can't promise anything. Sarah is really protective of Ethan, and she's not going to believe anything that makes him look bad. Thank you, Emily, I said, my voice filled with gratitude. Thank you so much. You're my only hope, she nodded, her expression still uncertain. I have to go, she said. I have a class in an hour. She stood up and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me sitting there, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. I didn't know if Emily would be able to convince Sarah. I didn't know if Sarah would even listen to her. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a chance. A small, fragile chance, but a chance nonetheless. I just had to wait and pray. The next few days crawled by at a snail's pace. I was a nervous wreck, constantly checking my phone, hoping for a call from Sarah, or from Miss Jenkins, or even from Emily, letting me know if she'd talked to Sarah. Nothing. The silence was suffocating. I tried to distract myself, but it was impossible. Every thought, every action, led me back to the same place, the accusation, the arrest, the possibility of spending years in prison for something I didn't do. The polygraph test was looming. I was scheduled to take it on Monday. I'd spent hours researching polygraph tests online, trying to understand how they worked and how to prepare for them. Everything the first read said the same thing. Be honest. Don't try to trick the machine. Just answer the questions truthfully, and you'll be fine. But what if the machine was wrong? What if it misinterpreted my nervousness as deception? What if it ruined my chances of proving my innocence? I knew I was being irrational, but I couldn't help it. I was terrified. On Sunday evening, I finally heard from Miss Jenkins. She called me around 8 p.m., her voice sounding tired. Daniel, she said, I have some news. Some good news and some not so good news. My heart sank. What is it? I asked, my voice trembling. The good news is that the psychological evaluation came back clean, she said. The psychologist found no evidence of any violent tendencies or any mental disorders that would predispose you to commit the crime you're accused of. That was a relief, at least. Okay, I said. What's the bad news? The investigation into Ethan's background hasn't turned up anything concrete. she said. His biological father is still largely absent from his life, and we haven't been able to find any evidence of abuse or neglect. He has a clean record. So we're back to square one? I asked, my voice filled with despair. Not exactly, she said. I did manage to speak to one of Ethan's former teachers. She said that he's a bright kid, but he can be dramatic. He tends to exaggerate things, and he has a very active imagination. Did she say anything about him making false accusations? I asked, my voice eager. No, she said, but she did say that he can sometimes have difficulty distinguishing between reality and fantasy. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was another piece of evidence that supported my theory that Ethan might be misinterpreting something or imagining things. Okay, I said. What about the polygraph test? Do you think I should still take it, miss? Jenkins hesitated. Polygraph tests are notoriously unreliable, she said. They're not admissible in court in most jurisdictions, but in this case, it might be worth taking the risk. If you pass the test, it could help to convince the prosecutor that you're telling the truth. It could also give us some leverage in plea negotiations. So you think I should do it? I asked. It's your decision, Daniel, she said. But if you're confident that you're telling the truth, it might be worth the gamble. I thought about it for a moment. I was terrified of the polygraph test, but I was even more terrified of the alternative. Okay, I said. I'll do it. Good, miss, Jenkins said. Just remember to stay calm, answer the questions truthfully, and don't try to overthink things. Easier said than done. I spent the rest of the evening trying to relax, but it was impossible. My mind was racing, replaying the events of the past few weeks, trying to prepare myself for the polygraph test. The next morning, I woke up feeling exhausted and nauseous. I forced myself to eat something, but I could barely swallow. I drove to the polygraph examiner's office, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The office was located in a nondescript building on the outskirts of town. It was small and sterile, with bare walls and uncomfortable chairs. The polygraph examiner was a middle-aged man with a stern face and a no-nonsense attitude. He introduced himself as Mr. Thompson and led me into a small room with a large machine and a computer screen. He explained the polygraph process to me in detail, hooking me up to various sensors that measured my heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and skin conductance. He then asked me a series of questions, some of which were irrelevant and some of which were directly related to the accusation against me. Did you hurt Ethan on Saturday, July 15th? Did you ever physically abuse Ethan? Did you ever touch Ethan in a way that made him uncomfortable? I answered each question, truthfully, my voice trembling. After the questioning was over, Mr. Thompson excused himself and left the room to analyze the results. I sat there alone, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for the verdict. It felt like an eternity. Finally, Mr. Thompson returned, his face unreadable. Mr. Daniel, he said, according to the polygraph. You were being, he paused, building the suspense, truthful in your answers. Relief washed over me in a tidal wave. I felt like I could finally breathe again. Are you sure? I asked, my voice hoarse. Yes, Mr. Thompson said. The results are conclusive. You were telling the truth. I wanted to jump up and down, to shout for joy, but I restrained myself. I knew that this was just one step in a long and difficult process. What does this mean? I asked. It means that the polygraph supports your claim of innocence, Mr. Thompson said. It doesn't prove that you're innocent, but it does suggest that you're telling the truth. I thanked Mr. Thompson and left the office, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. I called Miss Jenkins immediately and told her the good news. That's great, Daniel, she said. This could be very helpful. I'll contact the prosecutor and see if we can use this to our advantage. I went home and waited, hoping for a call from Sarah. Maybe now that she knew I was telling the truth, She would finally talk to me. But the call never came. I was starting to lose hope again. Then, late that night, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered it. "Hello?" I said. "Daniel?" a voice said on the other end. It was Emily, and she sounded terrified. "Emily? What's wrong?" I asked, my voice filled with concern. Her voice was trembling. "Daniel, I need your help. Something happened. Something really bad. What is it? Tell me," I urged, my heart pounding in my chest. "I talked to Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told her what we talked about Ethan's imagination, about the incident with Jessica." "And what did she say?" I asked, my voice tight. "She didn't believe me," Emily said. "She got really angry. She said I was lying, that I was trying to protect you." She hung up on me. My heart sank. I knew it was a long shot, but I'd hoped that Sarah would at least listen to Emily. "Okay," I said, trying to stay calm. "That's okay. It's not your fault. Thank you for trying. But that's not the worst part," Emily said, her voice cracking. "What do you mean?" I asked, my stomach churning with dread. "After I talked to Sarah, the first started thinking about Ethan," she said. "About his imagination, about the things he says. And I realized something that I should have realized a long time ago." "What is it, Emily?" "Tell me," I pleaded. She took a deep breath. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling, "I think Ethan might be being influenced by someone who's putting ideas into his head." My mind raced. "What do you mean? Who?" "I don't know for sure," she said, "but I think it might be his biological father." I felt a chill run down my spine. Ethan's biological father. The absent, unreliable figure who had caused so much pain in his life. "Why do you think that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because of the things Ethan has been saying lately," Emily said. "He's been talking about his dad a lot more than usual. He's been saying that his dad is a hero, that his dad is going to come and rescue him. And he's been saying things that sound like they're coming from someone else, not from Ethan himself." "Give me an example," I said, my mind racing. "Well," she said, "the other day, he told me that his dad said you were a bad man, that you were trying to replace him. He said his dad told him to be careful around you, that you might hurt him." My blood ran cold. This was it. This was the missing piece of the puzzle. "Emily, this is huge," I said, my voice urgent. "We need to tell someone. We need to tell the police." "I can't," she said, her voice filled with fear. "Sarah would kill me, and I don't have any proof. It's just a feeling." "Emily, this is more than a feeling," I said. "This could be the key to proving my innocence. If we can show that Ethan is being influenced by his father, it could explain everything." She hesitated. "I don't know," she said. "I'm scared." "Emily, I understand," I said, "but you're the only one who can help me. Please, just think about it." "Okay," she said reluctantly. "I'll think about it. But I can't promise anything." "Thank you, Emily," I said. "Thank you so much." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. I needed to find a way to prove that Ethan's father was influencing him. But how? I couldn't contact Sarah. I couldn't go near Ethan. And then it hit me. Social media. Ethan's father probably had a social media account. And if he was communicating with Ethan, there might be evidence on his account. I started searching for his name on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. It took me a while, but I finally found him on Facebook. His profile was mostly empty. He had a few pictures of himself, some generic posts about sports and politics, and a handful of friends. But then I noticed something. He had been posting a lot of anti-Daniel comments and making serious accusations. He claimed that Daniel was dangerous, that he was abusing his son, and that Ethan needed to be rescued. His posts were filled with anger and resentment. This was his attempt to influence his son by painting Daniel as a monster, maybe even to coach him. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A post from just a few days ago. It was a picture of Ethan, taken at the zoo. The picture was blurry, but it was definitely Ethan. He was standing in front of the giraffe exhibit, looking sad and lonely. The caption read, "Don't worry, buddy. Daddy's coming to get you. I'll make sure you're safe." I stared at the picture, my mind reeling. He had been at the zoo. He had been watching Ethan. And he had been communicating with him. This was it. This was the proof I needed. I took screenshots of the posts and sent them to Miss Jenkins. "I think I found something," I wrote in the email. "I think Ethan's father is influencing him." I waited anxiously for her reply. A few hours later, she called me. "Daniel," she said, her voice excited. "This is incredible. This could change everything. I'm going to take this to the prosecutor immediately. This could be enough to get the charges dropped." I felt a surge of hope, the strongest I'd felt in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, I was finally going to be cleared. But then, Miss Jenkins said something that made my heart sink. "There's just one problem," she said. "What is it?" "What problem?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The wave of hope that had washed over me just moments ago was now receding, leaving behind a cold, sinking feeling in my gut. "We need to prove that Ethan saw these posts," Miss Jenkins said. "Just showing that his father posted them isn't enough. We need to show that Ethan actually read them, that he was exposed to this influence." "But how can we do that?" I asked, my voice filled with despair. "We can't talk to Ethan. We can't go near him." "I know," she said. "It's a long shot, but we need to try to find some evidence that Ethan has access to his father's social media account. Maybe he uses his father's phone or tablet. Maybe he has his own account that he's not supposed to have." "I don't know," I said. "Sarah is very strict about screen time. I doubt she would let Ethan have his own social media account." "I know it's unlikely," Miss Jenkins said, "but we have to explore every possibility. I'm going to try to get a warrant to search Ethan's devices. But it's going to be difficult. We need to convince a judge that there's probable cause to believe that Ethan is being influenced by his father, and that evidence of this influence can be found on his devices." "Okay," I said. "What can I do? Just sit tight," she said. "I'll let you know if I need anything else." I hung up the phone and sank back into my chair, my head spinning. I'd come so close to proving my innocence, but now I was facing another obstacle. I spent the next few days in a state of agonizing uncertainty. I kept checking my phone, hoping for an update from Miss Jenkins. But there was nothing. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't focus on anything. I was consumed by anxiety and fear. I started to doubt myself again. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Ethan's father wasn't influencing him. Maybe Ethan was just making things up, or maybe I really had hurt him and I just didn't remember. I was starting to crack. Then, on Friday afternoon, Miss Jenkins called me again. Her voice sounded grim. "Daniel," she said, "I have some bad news. The judge denied our request for a warrant to search Ethan's devices. He said that we didn't have enough probable cause." My heart sank. This was it. This was the end. "So what does this mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It means that we're back to square one," she said. "Without any evidence that Ethan is being influenced by his father, we can't get the charges dropped. We're going to have to go to trial." "Trial?" I said, my voice filled with horror. "But I'm innocent. I can't go to trial. I'll lose." "I know, Daniel," she said, "but we don't have any other choice. We're going to have to fight this in court. We're going to have to convince a jury that you're telling the truth." "But how?" I asked, my voice desperate. "It's just his word against mine. And he has a bruise. No one is going to believe me." "We're going to have to build a strong defense," she said. "We're going to have to challenge Ethan's testimony. We're going to have to present evidence of his imagination, his sensitivity, his history of making false accusations. And we're going to have to show the jury that you're a good person, that you would never hurt a child." "But it's not enough," I cried. It's not going to be enough. I'm going to lose everything. Daniel, you have to stay strong, she said. I know this is difficult, but you can't give up. We're going to fight for you. We're going to do everything we can to prove your innocence. I hung up the phone, feeling completely defeated. I was going to trial, facing the possibility of spending years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to cope. I didn't know how to survive. I was lost. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind racing, replaying the events of the past few weeks. I thought about Sarah. I missed her so much. I missed her smile, her laugh, her touch. I missed our conversations, our walks in the park, our quiet nights at home. I thought about Ethan. I missed him too. I missed his energy, his enthusiasm, his imagination. I missed reading him bedtime stories, playing games with him, watching him grow. And I thought about his father, the man who had caused so much pain and suffering in Ethan's life, the man who was now trying to destroy mine. I hated him. I hated him with every fiber of my being. I wanted to confront him, to scream at him, to make him pay for what he had done. But I knew I couldn't. I had to stay away from him. I had to protect myself. As I lay there in the darkness, I realized something. I couldn't give up. I couldn't let him win. I had to fight for my life, for my freedom, for my future. I had to prove my innocence. And I knew just how to do it. I was going to talk to Ethan's father. The decision was reckless, I knew. Miss? Jenkins would have a heart attack if she found out. The restraining order was clear. Stay away from Sarah and Ethan. But this wasn't about them. This was about Ethan's father. I needed to understand him. I needed to know what he was thinking, what he was planning. And maybe, just maybe, I could convince him to tell the truth. Or at least, I might gain some insight that could help my case. Finding him wasn't difficult. Thanks to his active, albeit toxic, social media presence, I knew he lived in a small town about an hour away. I found his address with a quick online search. The next morning, I drove to his town. I parked a few blocks away from his house and walked the rest of the way. My heart was pounding in my chest. This felt insane. His house was a small, run-down bungalow. The paint was peeling, the lawn was overgrown, and the porch was littered with trash. It looked like a place where hope went to die. I took a deep breath and walked up to the front door. I knocked, my hands shaking. There was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I started to lose hope. Maybe he wasn't home. Maybe I'd driven all this way for nothing. Then I heard a noise inside, a shuffling sound, like someone was moving around. I knocked again, even louder this time. Finally, the door opened. Ethan's father stood there, his eyes narrowed, his face filled with suspicion. He was a gaunt man, with a scraggly beard and a haunted look in his eyes. He looked older than his age. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice gruff. "My name is Daniel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I used to date Sarah." His eyes widened in anger. "What are you doing here?" he snarled. "Get away from my house. I'll call the police." "I just want to talk," I said, holding up my hands in a gesture of peace. "Please." "Just give me 5 minutes." He hesitated, then sighed. "Fine," he said, "but make it quick." He stepped aside and let me in. The inside of the house was even worse than the outside. It was filthy and cluttered, with dirty dishes piled in the sink, clothes strewn across the floor, and a thick layer of dust covering everything. He led me into the living room, which was dominated by a large, old television set. The air was thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and cheap beer. "What do you want?" he asked again, his voice impatient. "I want to know why you're doing this," I said, my voice low. "Why are you trying to turn Ethan against me?" he scoffed. "I'm not doing anything," he said. "I'm just trying to protect my son." "You're a dangerous man, Daniel. You hurt him." "You don't deserve to be around him." "I didn't hurt him," I protested, my voice rising. "I would never hurt Ethan." I care about him. You're the one who's hurting him by filling his head with lies. Lies, he said, his eyes flashing with anger. I'm telling him the truth. You're the one who's lying. You're the one who's trying to replace me. You think you can just waltz into his life and take my place? Well, you're wrong. He's my son, and I'm not going to let you take him away from me. I'm not trying to take him away from you, I said. I just want what's best for him. And what's best for him is to have two loving parents in his life, not to be caught in the middle of your feud. Feud? He said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. This isn't a feud, Daniel. This is about protecting my son from a predator. I'm not a predator, I shouted. I'm a good person. I would never hurt a child. Then why did Ethan say you hurt him? He asked, his voice triumphant. Why did he have a bruise on his arm? I don't know, I cried. I swear, I don't know. Maybe he fell. Maybe he bumped into something. Maybe he's just confused. But I didn't hurt him. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with doubt. Then he sighed. I don't believe you, he said. But I'm willing to listen. Tell me your side of the story. Tell me what happened that day. I took a deep breath and told him everything. I told him about our trip to the zoo, about Ethan's sudden outburst in the car, about the bruise on his arm. I told him about the police, the arrest, the polygraph test. I told him about Emily and about the social media posts. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he shook his head. I don't know what to believe, he said. I want to believe you, Daniel. I really do, but I can't just ignore what Ethan said. He's my son. I have to protect him. I understand, I said. But please, just think about what I've said. Think about Ethan. Think about what's best for him. He nodded slowly. I will, he said. I promise. I stood up to leave. As I reached the door, he stopped me. Daniel, he said, there's something else I need to tell you. I turned to face him, my heart pounding. Ethan, he started, then paused. Ethan told me something about that day that he hasn't told anyone else. What is it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The air in the room suddenly felt thick and heavy, charged with a strange, unsettling energy. He hesitated, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and confusion. He said you got angry at the zoo. He said you grabbed his arm really hard because he was running away from you. My mind reeled. I searched my memory, trying to recall any instance of anger, of force. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking. I never grabbed his arm hard. I never got angry at him at the zoo. He must be mistaken. He looked at me skeptically. He seemed pretty sure about it, he said. He said you scared him. But why would he say that? I asked, my voice desperate. Why would he make something like that up? He shrugged. I don't know, he said. Maybe he's confused. Maybe he's exaggerating. Maybe he's just trying to get attention. But that's what he told me. A cold dread washed over me. This was worse than I thought. Ethan wasn't just being influenced by his father. He wasn't just making things up. He actually believed that I had hurt him. And if he believed it, then there was no way I could prove my innocence. I don't know what to do, I said, my voice filled with despair. I'm lost. I'm defeated. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of pity and regret. I'm sorry, he said. I wish I could help you, but I can't. I have to protect my son, I nodded slowly. I understand, I said. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving him standing there in the doorway, watching me go. I drove back to my apartment, feeling numb and empty. The hope that I had felt just a few days ago was now completely extinguished. I was going to trial, facing a jury that was likely to believe Ethan's testimony. I was going to be convicted of a crime I didn't commit. I was going to spend years in prison. My life was over. I considered running away, disappearing, starting a new life under a new name. But I knew I couldn't do that. I couldn't abandon my family, my friends, my lawyer. I couldn't let Ethan's father win. I had to face this. I had to fight this, even if I knew I was going to lose. I spent the next few days preparing for trial. I met with Miss Jenkins, reviewed the evidence, and practiced my testimony. She tried to be optimistic, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She knew that my chances of winning were slim. The trial began on Monday morning. The courtroom was packed with people. Sarah, Ethan, his father, my parents, my friends, the media. I felt like I was on display, like everyone was judging me, scrutinizing me, waiting for me to crack. The prosecution presented their case first. They called Ethan to the stand. He looked small and vulnerable, his eyes wide with fear. He told his story in a soft, hesitant voice. He said that I had hurt him at the zoo, that I had grabbed his arm hard because he was running away from me. He said that I had scared him. His testimony was devastating. The jury listened intently, their faces filled with sympathy. The prosecution also called Sarah to the stand. She testified that Ethan had been acting differently since the incident, that he was more withdrawn, more anxious, more afraid of me. She said that she believed Ethan, that she was convinced that I had hurt him. Her testimony was even more devastating. The jury looked at me with disgust and contempt. Then it was my turn to testify. I took the stand, my heart pounding in my chest. I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I told my story, calmly and clearly. I denied that I had hurt Ethan. I explained that I loved him, that I would never do anything to harm him. I tried to convince the jury that Ethan was mistaken, that he was exaggerating, that he was being influenced by his father. But I could see that they didn't believe me. They looked at me with skepticism and suspicion. Miss Jenkins did her best to defend me. She cross-examined Ethan, pointing out inconsistencies in his testimony. She challenged Sarah's credibility. She presented evidence of Ethan's imagination, his sensitivity, his history of making false accusations. But it wasn't enough. The jury was convinced that I was guilty. After several days of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. I waited anxiously, my stomach churning with dread. Hours passed. The sun set and the moon rose. Still, there was no word from the jury. Finally, around midnight, the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict. I stood up, my legs trembling. I walked to the front of the courtroom, my heart pounding in my chest. The jury filed in, their faces grim. The foreman stood up and read the verdict. We, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Miller, guilty of. He paused, building the suspense. Child abuse. The world tilted. I heard a gasp from my parents, a sob from my friends. I saw Sarah's face, filled with a mixture of triumph and relief. I saw Ethan's father, smirking. I had lost. The word guilty echoed in the courtroom, reverberating through my skull, each syllable a hammer blow to my soul. My vision blurred. The faces around me swam in a distorted haze. I felt like I was falling, plummeting into a bottomless abyss. I was led away in handcuffs, the cold steel biting into my wrists. The clicking of the cuffs was the soundtrack to my ruined life. As I was escorted out, I caught Sarah's eye. There was a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Was it pity? Relief? Satisfaction? Before she turned away, Ethan was clinging to her leg, his face buried in her skirt. The next few weeks were a blur of legal procedures, sentencing hearings, and appeals that were predictably denied. Miss Jenkins fought valiantly, but the jury's verdict had sealed my fate. The judge, a stern-faced woman with no patience for perceived child abusers, handed down the maximum sentence, 5 years in prison. 5 years. A lifetime. Prison was everything you'd imagine, and worse. The constant noise, the stifling heat, the ever-present threat of violence. I was an outsider, a pariah, labeled as a child abuser. I spent most of my time trying to avoid trouble, keeping my head down and clinging to the hope that someday, somehow, the truth would come out. My parents visited me regularly, their faces etched with worry and despair. Their unwavering belief in my innocence was the only thing that kept me going. My friends wrote letters offering support and encouragement, but the letters grew fewer and further between as the years dragged on. People move on. Time warped in prison. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. The outside world became a distant memory. My old life, my old self, felt like a dream, but I never forgot. I never forgot Sarah, I never forgot Ethan, and I never forgot the injustice that had landed me in this hellhole. Then, 3 years into my sentence, I received a letter that changed everything. It was from Emily, Ethan's former babysitter. The letter was shaky, almost illegible. It read, "Daniel, I know it's been a long time. I'm so sorry for everything that happened. I should have spoken up sooner, but I was scared. Ethan's father. He's gone. He died a few months ago in a car accident. Before he died, he told me something. He confessed. He admitted that he had manipulated Ethan, that he had filled his head with lies about you. He said he was jealous and angry, and he wanted to ruin your life. He said he told Ethan to say you hurt him, and he even showed him how to make the bruise on his arm. Daniel, the first, so sorry. I know this doesn't change anything, but I had to tell you the truth. I hope you can find a way to forgive me." Emily, I read the letter over and over again, my hands shaking. It was like a dam had burst inside me, releasing a torrent of emotions, relief, anger, grief, and a burning desire for justice. Ethan's father was dead. He couldn't be held accountable for what he had done, but his confession, it was enough. It was the truth. I showed the letter to my lawyer, who had never given up on my case. She immediately filed a motion for a new trial based on newly discovered evidence. This time, the judge granted the motion. The second trial was a completely different experience. Emily testified, recounting Ethan's father's confession in detail. She was nervous, but she was determined to tell the truth. The prosecution, realizing the weakness of their case, offered me a deal. They would drop the charges in exchange for a guilty plea to a lesser offense, something like reckless endangerment. I refused. I wanted a complete exoneration. I wanted my name cleared. I wanted the world to know that I was innocent. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning their verdict. Not guilty. This time, the courtroom erupted in cheers. My parents wept with joy. My friends embraced me. And I, for the first time in years, felt a glimmer of hope. I was released from prison, a free man. But I was also a broken man. The years of injustice, the constant fear, the loss of my old life had taken their toll. I tried to rebuild my life, but it was difficult. The stigma of being a former convict followed me everywhere. I couldn't get a decent job. I couldn't find a place to live. I couldn't escape the whispers and the stares. I thought about Sarah and Ethan often. I wondered if they knew the truth. I wondered if they regretted what they had done. One day, a few years after my release, I received a letter. It was from Sarah. She apologized. She said she had been wrong to doubt me. She said she had been blinded by her fear for Ethan. She said she was ashamed of what she had done. She also said that Ethan knew the truth. He remembered what his father had told him to say. He was filled with guilt and remorse. She asked if I would be willing to meet with them. I hesitated. I didn't know if I was ready to face them, but I also knew that I couldn't move on with my life until I had closure. I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a park a few hours away from their home. When I arrived, I saw them waiting for me. Sarah looked older, more tired. Ethan was a teenager now, tall and lanky. We sat down on a park bench and talked. It was awkward at first, but gradually we began to open up. Sarah apologized again, her voice choked with emotion. Ethan apologized too, his eyes filled with tears. I listened to them, and I realized that they had suffered too. They had been victims of Ethan's father's manipulation, just like me. I forgave them. It wasn't easy, but I did it. I realized that holding on to anger and resentment would only poison my own soul. We talked for hours, sharing our stories, our pain, our hopes for the future. As the sun began to set, we stood up to leave. Ethan looked at me, his eyes filled with sincerity. "Thank you, Daniel," he said, "for forgiving us." I smiled. "You're welcome, Ethan," I said. Then he did something that surprised me. He stepped forward and hugged me. It was a brief, awkward hug, but it was also a hug of forgiveness, of redemption, of healing. As I walked away from them, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. The nightmare was finally over. I would never get back the years I had lost. I would never fully recover from the trauma I had endured. But I had survived. I had found the truth. I had found forgiveness. And I had found a way to move on with my life.